when a reporter breaks an unspoken trust, like revealing injuries or disparaging fans, they risk more than backlash. They risk being shut out. Scott Agnes found himself on the receiving end of that reality when Caitlin Clark, typically gracious in interviews, kept him in noticeable distance during a press event. Her tone shifted. Her expressions hardened. She made no attempt to hide her discomfort.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
The contrast to her interactions with other reporters was striking and intentional. It was a pointed reminder that the relationship between athletes and the press isn't fixed. It evolves with every. Clark's restrained demeanor wasn't about pettiness. It was about control. As athletes become more media savvy, they're taking back the narrative in subtle but powerful ways. For someone like Clark, who sits at the intersection of public spotlight and league growth, every gesture carries weight. By holding Agnes at arm's length, she reasserted control over how and with whom her story gets told. This isn't about silencing critics. It's about drawing lines where trust has been. Folder not found. Create new folder. Stephen A. Smith. When Stephen A. Smith goes off, it's usually about sports. A bad trade. A playoff choke. A locker room scandal. But this time, it wasn't about stats or strategy. It was about respect. And the moment that sparked it, Caitlin Clark, standing in front of the media, delivering one of the coldest, most controlled responses of her career, without saying anything she didn't absolutely have to. No fire, no drama. Just short answers, zero eye contact, and that unmistakable tension in the target of that silence? Reporter Scott Agnes. Clark's demeanor told the story before she said a single word. She was polite, but distant, reserved. The warmth she'd shown to other reporters disappeared completely. And the contrast wasn't just noticeable. It was impossible to ignore. People online were quick to call it out. Why did Caitlin go cold the moment Agnes stepped up? Why the clipped tone? Why the refusal to engage? Then the history came out. Too, Agnes had reported sensitive injury information about Clark's team, details the organization hadn't made public. He'd also published derogatory remarks about Clark's fan base, framing them in a way that felt personal, not professional. That kind of coverage doesn't just land quietly in a locker room. It lingers. So when Agnes showed up to ask questions like nothing happened, Clark didn't respond with hostility. She didn't snap. She didn't storm off. She did something way more effective. She made him earn every word she gave. And that, right there, was the moment Stephen A. Smith weighed in, and he did not hold back. He stood firmly in Clark's corner. Because for him, this wasn't about drama. It was about boundaries. About what athletes owe the press, and what they absolutely don't. Smith made it clear. Clark had every right to respond the way she did. He said flat out, if someone breaks your trust, you don't owe them a smile. You don't owe them the same energy. Especially when you're the one being dissected, criticized, and commodified by people who feel no accountability for how they treat you in the press. And that's exactly what this was. A journalist who pushed too far, who compromised his relationship with one of the most high-profile athletes in the league, and then acted surprised when the access he once had started disappearing. 2. But Clark's response wasn't emotional. It was strategic. She didn't ignore the question. She didn't make a scene. She just disengaged. Minimal words. Limited eye contact. Full composure. It wasn't rudeness. It was a very clear signal. You don't have my trust anymore. And in an industry where athletes are trained to put on a smile and move on, that kind of boundary setting is rare. And A didn't just defend her actions. He explained them. He reminded people that players like Caitlin Clark aren't just athletes. They're brands. Public figures with massive followings, media obligations, and nonstop scrutiny. And if a journalist crosses a line, that's a relationship that might not come back. This wasn't about media criticism. It wasn't about Clark dodging hard questions. It was about a reporter making personal comments, disclosing confidential team information, and then expecting business as usual. Clark didn't give him that. And Smith made it clear, that's not just acceptable. It's because this is where we are now. Athletes like Clark have influence. and they're not afraid to use it to protect their image and their space. She didn't need to attack Agnes. She didn't need to respond with the same negativity he had shown her and her fans. She just gave him the exact amount of engagement he'd earned, the bare minimum. And that hit harder than anything she could have said. Because when a player of Clark's stature shuts down a reporter with composure, the message spreads fast. Fans picked up on it. The media picked up on it. And most importantly, so did others. The balance of power has shifted. There was a time when journalists controlled the narrative completely. They shaped the stories. They decided what the public saw and how. They saw it. But today's athletes have tools. They have platforms. They can shape their image directly without the middleman. And when that middleman behaves like Scott Agnes did, they can also decide to cut him out. Clark's behavior wasn't petty. It wasn't dramatic. It was a textbook example of someone setting a line without raising their voice or breaking professionalism. She didn't stop doing her job. She just stopped doing his for him. And that's the part that makes traditional media uncomfortable. Because when an athlete chooses not to engage, it challenges the idea that access is automatic, that the press is owed participation, no matter how they behave. As Stephen A. Smith said no. That's not how it works. Not anymore. He pointed out that there are consequences to the way journalists handle their relationships with players. That when you publish something invasive, when you paint a player or their fan base in a negative light, that's going to affect how and if that player talks to you again. And sure enough, it did. Clark's restrained, measured coldness went viral. People saw it. People understood it. And before long, the headlines shifted from "why was she cold" to "what did he do to deserve it?" And once those questions started being asked, Scott Agnes's reporting was re-examined. The tone, the choices, the editorial decisions, the leaks, the criticism of fans, all of it came back into focus. And the result? Agnes was out. Let go. Fired. No dramatic press release. No drawn-out explanation. Just silence. And the timing? Unmissable. That moment between Clark and Agnes didn't just shift perception. It shifted access. And when a star like Caitlin Clark makes it clear you've lost her trust, the fallout isn't just public opinion. It's professional consequences. Stephen A. Smith wasn't surprised. He's watched media relationships crumble when respect goes out the window. And in this case, he was unapologetically on Clark's side. Because this isn't just about one athlete and one reporter. This is about the evolving dynamic between players and the press. And it raises serious questions. Should athletes be expected to engage with journalists who have misrepresented them? Should they smile through uncomfortable questions out of obligation? Should trust be a one-way street? Stephen A. said what many were thinking. Absolutely not. Athletes are not required to give full access to people who've burned that bridge. And if a player uses body language, tone, and restraint to communicate that line has been crossed, that's not unprofessional. That's honest. And what Caitlin Clark did? That was honesty in real time. No theatrics. Just a clear, strategic withdrawal of warmth and engagement. A decision that said, I'll answer your question, but I'm not pretending this is okay. It's a new era in sports media. One where athletes control more of their image than ever. And one where reporters have to be more aware of how their words can affect relationships long-term. Caitlin Clark didn't change the game, but she just gave us the most public, most poised example of how it's being played now. So what do you think? Was Clark justified in the way she responded to Scott Agnes? Did Stephen A. get it right when he said athletes have every right to protect their space? Or are we losing something important when players limit their engagement? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like this if you respect how Clark handled it. And subscribe if you're following this shift in media power. Because stories like this aren't going away. They're just Caitlin Clark didn't have to walk out of the room. She didn't have to call out Scott Agnes by name. She didn't need to tweet a vague quote or clap back in front of a mic. She didn't even need to raise an eyebrow. All she had to do was nothing. And somehow, that nothing said everything. You could feel the tension. One moment she was answering questions with the usual calm confidence she's known for. Measured, engaging, even warm. The next? That tone flattened. Her eyes dropped. Her shoulders tensed just enough. A half-second pause before speaking. The warmth? Gone. And people noticed. Everyone noticed. Because this wasn't just Caitlin Clark being distant. This was specific. This was targeted disengagement. Her entire energy shifted only when Scott Agnes started speaking. That wasn't an accident. That was a line being drawn. And when Stephen A. Smith saw it, he wasn't just watching a media moment. He was watching a lesson in restraint, boundaries, and control. The kind that's usually behind closed doors. Except this time, it played out on camera. Stephen A. did what no one else with a platform that size was doing. He said what needed to be said, loudly, clearly, and unapologetically. He didn't just defend Caitlin Clark. He defended the principle of what she did. The right to not pretend. The right to not fake respect for someone who had already forfeited it. Because that's exactly what this was about. Not drama. Not ego. Trust. And Agnes had already lost that. Too. It started with his reporting. The decision to leak injury details the team hadn't made public. The tone of his coverage. The way he referred to Clark's fan base. Not as supporters, but as a problem. And this wasn't just critique. It was loaded. Dismissive. Personal. So when he showed up again to do his job, to ask his questions like everything was normal, Caitlin didn't blow up. She didn't pull a stunt. She did something way more. She let him feel the shift. She didn't give him attitude. She gave him distance. And that distance, it spoke volumes. That's why the moment blew up the way it did. It wasn't just awkward. It was calculated. And that calculation landed. Fans knew it. Analysts caught it. Reporters watched, and Stephen A. Smith, he said it louder than anybody. This is what happens when you forget that athletes are human beings, not just press sound bites. For so long, the assumption in sports journalism has been that the athlete has to play nice, no matter what. That they have to smile through any line of questioning. That they're supposed to pretend they haven't read the headlines, haven't seen the tweets, haven't noticed how they've been covered. But Clark made it clear. She has noticed. And she's not going to reward it. And Stephen A., he couldn't have been more blunt about it. He said if you're a reporter who's chosen to cross the line, whether that's leaking sensitive info, dragging a player's fan base, or shifting from accountability into antagonism, you don't get to be surprised when that player starts treating you differently. That's not unprofessional. That's the cost of what you published. What makes Caitlin Clark's moment so powerful is that it wasn't loud. It was quiet, reserved, yet impossible to ignore. Because when a high-profile athlete pulls back from a reporter like that, and the public sees it in real time, it doesn't just reflect badly on that one interaction. It calls into question the entire dynamic. It makes people start asking, how many other players feel this way? How many athletes have had to smile through questions from someone they don't respect? That's the shift. That's the ripple effect. Clark isn't the only one holding the pen. Athletes today aren't just subjects in someone else's story. They're narrators. They've got platforms, influence, leverage. And when they decide someone's no longer getting full access, that's not bitterness. That's strategy. And in Clark's case, that strategy was flawless. She didn't lose her composure. She didn't throw a jab. She answered the question, fulfilled the obligation, but made sure that everyone watching knew this wasn't just another reporter. This was someone who had already lost her confidence. And when that happened, the story didn't stop at the press conference. It carried over. People started digging. Agnes's past reporting got put under the microscope. The tone, the framing, the leaked info, it all resurfaced. And eventually, he was out. Whether anyone officially connected the dots or not didn't matter. The timing said everything. You don't survive that kind of public breakdown in trust when it's this visible. When the video's been replayed, dissected, captioned, and passed around like a case study. Stephen A. Smith, Stephen A., said it plain and simple. Scott Agnes paid the price. And not because Clark asked for it. Not because she tried to get him fired. But because he lost the thing no reporter can afford to lose, his credibility with the person he was covering. That's what this whole thing boils down to. Athletes like Caitlin Clark are rewriting the rules of media engagement. They're making it clear that if you want access, it has to come with respect. That doesn't mean reporters can't ask tough questions. That's their job. But it means they can't expect players to treat them like allies after they've chosen to act like adversaries. And that's the distinction Stephen A. was shouting about. Journalists still have a role. No one's saying otherwise. But the days of one-sided power are gone. The days of, I can say whatever I want and you'll still talk to me, are over. Now, athletes are curating who gets access, who gets the full version of them. And if you've shown that you're not going to handle that access responsibly, you're going to get what Scott Agnes got at distance. And that's if you're lucky. Because in this new media environment, the microphone doesn't guarantee a response. The camera doesn't guarantee engagement. And once the trust is gone, you don't get to demand it back. Clark didn't flinch, didn't fake it, didn't give more than she had to. And Stephen A. Smith stood by her because he recognized the reality. This wasn't drama. This was an athlete owning her presence. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't need defense. But when someone with a platform like Stephen A. sees what's really going on and says it, that's when it becomes something bigger. A turning point. Because now, other athletes are watching. Other reporters are thinking twice. Other fans are realizing that when you see a press interaction like that, it isn't just about tension. It's about boundaries. About professionalism that doesn't perform for the cameras, but holds its ground quietly and confidently. And in that silence, a whole new set of expectations is being. So where does this leave the media? It leaves them with a choice. Respect the player or lose the privilege. Cover them with integrity or prepare to get the cold shoulder. Because the days of unchecked press power are over. Caitlin Clark didn't have to say it. She just had to show it. And thanks to Stephen A., now everyone is paying attention. The shift has happened. It's already here. And if you're in sports media, you either adapt or you get left out in the cold, exactly where Scott Agnes ended up. Caitlin Clark made that clear without needing to raise her voice, post a cryptic message, or explain herself. She let her face, her tone, her silence do the talking. And what it said was simple. I don't trust you. I haven't forgotten what you did. And I'm not giving you access to me like nothing happened. And that right there, that's influence. Not the kind that's flashy. Not the kind that's loud. The kind that says, I don't have to give you a reaction. I am the reaction. What made this moment so effective wasn't that Clark shut down a reporter. It's how she did it. It wasn't some dramatic walk-off or media meltdown. It was a lesson in restraint. A perfect demonstration of selective professionalism. She fulfilled the obligation. She answered the question, but the way she answered it, cold, flat, controlled. And then she moved on. But everyone else? They didn't move on. Because when someone with Clark's stature goes cold like that, people start asking why. They look into it. They remember the articles, the tweets, the offhand comments that led to the tension. Scott Agnes wasn't just any reporter. He had a history with Caitlin's team. A history that included publishing injury details the team hadn't released and making negative generalizations about her fan base. Not critiques about the game. Shots at the people who support her. And that's where he lost her. Not because she can't take criticism, but because she's not going to give energy to someone who disrespects the people who lift her up. And once that trust is gone, that's it. There's no warm exchange. No fake smile. No return to normal. And that's what Stephen A. Smith understood instantly. That's why he came out swinging, not to defend a favorite, but to defend a principle. The idea that athletes, especially women athletes, don't have to continue extending grace to people who've proven they don't deserve it. For too long, the media's had the upper hand. They write the headlines. They pick the sound bites. They get to decide what's drama, what's unprofessional, and what's just doing the job. But now, that balance is shifting. And Clark, she didn't just shift it, she showed it. She showed that in 2025, a top-tier athlete doesn't need to entertain every reporter, doesn't need to over-explain, doesn't need to be sweet and forgiving towards someone who made things personal. And when the fallout came, when Agnes was let go after the clip went viral, Clark didn't gloat. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because the entire internet watched that moment and collectively went, yeah, that's earned. This wasn't about canceling someone. This was about consequence. When you misuse access, you lose it. And when you do that with a star like Caitlin Clark, the industry feels it. Stephen A. made that crystal clear. He wasn't just reacting. He was teaching, telling reporters that if they want long-term access, They better stop treating athletes like disposable content and start treating them like people with boundaries, with pride, with memories, because athletes remember. They remember who respected them in the hard moments, who showed up fair, who kept things professional, and they remember who didn't. And now, they have the power to respond, not with outbursts, but with silence. That kind of control, it's devastating, and it's effective. Because the clip of Clark answering Scott Agnes like he was just another stranger wasn't just cold. It was clinical. It was years of media training, image control, and personal disappointment delivered in 30 seconds of quiet detachment. That moment will be studied, referenced, repeated. And if you're a reporter watching that, you now know access is earned and re-earned. Every single. So let's not pretend the game hasn't changed. It has. Caitlin Clark made that clear. Stephen A. Smith amplified it. And now, the rest of the league, the media, and every rising athlete knows the power dynamic is no longer one-sided. Respect the line or get shut out. If you've ever seen a moment where someone said more through silence than 1,000 press releases, drop your thoughts below. Let us know what you saw, what you felt, and whether you think this was overdue. Like if you respect the way Caitlin handled it. And subscribe because these moments aren't just stories. They're the blueprint for what sports media looks like now.